All right, hello everyone, and welcome to Beginning Algebra. Today we're just going to do a little bit of a pre-algebra review, going over the first chapter of your book. So in this section you're going to learn the definition of prime and composite numbers, how to write the prime factorization of a number, how to find the least common multiple of two or more numbers, the definition of a fraction, how to write an equivalent fraction, and how to multiply, divide, and add and subtract fractions. So prime numbers are any number that's only divisible by 1 in itself. So the first prime numbers include 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, so on. Okay? Note that 2 is the only even prime number. So if a number is not prime, then it's known as a composite number. A composite number is any number that can be written as a product of prime numbers. So all whole numbers that are not prime numbers are composite. We can break them down into their prime factors. And so all composite numbers can be written as a product of prime factors. This product is known as the prime factorization. Factors just mean numbers that are multiplied to give you something else. Right? So what we want to do is we want to figure out what numbers do we multiply together to get 45. And we really need to know what prime numbers we multiply together to get 45. Well, we know that 45 is 9 times 5, and 5 is prime, but 9 is not. But we can break 9 down more. We know that 9 is 3 times 3, and so the prime factorization of 45 is 3 times 3 times 5. We can do the same thing with the next two numbers. 75 is just 25 times 3. 25 is not prime, but we can write 25 as 5 times 5. And so 75 is 5 times 5 times 3. And then finally, we can do a similar thing with 120. 120 is just 12 times 10. Neither of those is prime, but 12 is 4 times 3. 10 is 2 times 5. 2, 3, and 5 are all prime numbers, but 4 is not. So we can break 4 down to 2 times 2. And then our prime factorization is given by this group of numbers. And so 120 is just 2 times 2 times 2 times 3 times 5. The least common multiple of a list of numbers is the smallest number that is a multiple of all the numbers on the list. Okay, so it's the smallest numbers that all numbers divide into evenly. To find the least common multiple, we want to write the prime factorization of each number, and then we want to write the product containing each different prime factor the greatest number of times that it appears in any one factorization. Seems a little complicated, but let's try it. We want to find the least common multiple of 14 and 35. Well, 14, if we write the prime factorization, that's going to be 2 times 7. 35, if we write the prime factorization, it's going to be 7 times 5. So we want to write each number, or each product, the most number of times that it appears in any one factorization. Well, 7 appears once in each one, and so we just need to write 7 one time. 2 appears once, and 5 appears once. And so our least common multiple, if we multiply all of this together, is going to be 70. Least is kind of a misnomer. It's going to be bigger than the numbers on the list. So now let's try the same thing with 3 different numbers. We have 10, 12, and 16. 10 is 2 times 5. 12 is 4 times 3, which is 2 times 2 times 3. And 16 is 4 times 4, which is 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. So to find the least common multiple, we want to write every factor the most number of times that it appears in any factorization. Well, 2 appears 4 times in that one factorization, so we have to write 4 2's. And then we have a 3 and a 5. And so the least common multiple of all these numbers, 240. And so that's the smallest number that 10, 12, and 16 will all divide into evenly. So now let's go on and talk a little bit about fractions. A fraction is just a quotient of two numbers. Quotient meaning divide. Fractions have two parts separated by a fraction bar. Right, so if we have something like 2 over 9, this is our fraction bar. On the top of the fraction bar is what's called the numerator. And on the bottom we have the denominator. So some properties about fractions: any number divided by itself is equal to 1. So if we have 7 over 7, 7 divided by 7 is just 1. Any number divided by 1 is just itself. So 15 over 1 is just 15. 0 divided by any number is just 0. So if we have 0 over 3, that's just 0. And finally, any number divided by 0 is undefined. So 3 over 0 is undefined. So one thing that we need to be able to do is write an equivalent fraction. Fractions that represent the same part of the whole but are written in different forms are known as equivalent fractions. To find an equivalent fraction, we're going to multiply by 1, but we're going to multiply by a special 1. It's going to be based on the problem, but remember that we can write 1 as 3 over 3, or 7 over 7. Okay, so we're going to multiply by the same number top and bottom, and essentially that is the same as multiplying by 1. We're going to use this to add and subtract fractions. Okay, and then just remember to always do the same thing to the numerator and the denominator. So we want to write 2/5 as an equivalent fraction with a denominator of 15. So we have 2 over 5. And we want to rewrite it as something over 15. Well, we always have to do the same thing top and bottom. So we have to figure out, what do we multiply times 5 to get 15? Well, 5 times 3 is 15. And so if we multiply the bottom by 3, we have to multiply the top by 3. And so our equivalent fraction is just 6 over 15. We can do the same thing here with 1 over 4. And we want to write it as equivalent fraction with a denominator of 20. So we have to ask ourselves, what times 4 will give us 20? 4 times 5 is equal to 20. So whatever we do to the bottom, we have to do to the top. 1 times 5 is just 5. And there's our equivalent fraction. In addition to writing equivalent fractions, you need to be able to simplify fractions. To simplify fractions, we simply just want to divide the numerator and denominator by the same number. This may help to write out that prime factorization and then remove the factors that they have in common. And always remember to simplify as much as possible. So we're starting off with 20 over 35. If we write out the prime factorization for both of those numbers, 20 is 5 times 4, which is 5 times 2 times 2. 35 is 7 times 5. Okay. So top and bottom, they both have in common a 5. So we can basically get rid of those. 5 divided by 5 is just 1. And then we write what's left. 2 times 2 is 4 over 7. And that's our simplified fraction. We can do the same thing with 12 over 40. 12 is just 4 times 3, which is 2 times 2 times 3. 40 is 4 times 10, which is 2 times 2 times 2 times 5. Now, once again, we can get rid of the ones that are the same top and bottom, so 2's and 2's. And what we're left with is 3 over 10. So in addition to being able to simplify fractions and write equivalent fractions, we also need to know how to multiply and divide fractions. So to multiply fractions, you simply just want to multiply straight across. So if we have a over b times c over d, we're going to wind up with a times c over b times d. Or 2 over 3 times 7 over 5. That's just 2 times 7 over 3 times 5. Remember to always simplify your answer if you need to. So to divide fractions, we first want to find the reciprocal of the second fraction and then multiply. The reciprocal means to basically just flip the fraction over. We'll talk more about reciprocals in a few sections. The reciprocal of any fraction can be found by simply flipping the fraction over. So if you have 2/3, the reciprocal is just 3/2. And so if we want to divide fractions, we're first going to take 2 over 9 divided by 3 over 4. When you divide fractions, you want to flip the second fraction or find the reciprocal of the second fraction and multiply. And so 2 over 9 divided by 3 over 4 is going to become 2 over 9 times 4 over 3. And then we can multiply, and we'll get 8 over 27. So when you're dividing fractions, remember this idea of keep, change, and flip. You're going to keep the first fraction, change the sign in the middle from division to multiplication, and then flip the second fraction. Okay, so let's just practice this a little bit. We want to multiply or divide as indicated. So we got 3 over 4 times 8 over 9. That's going to be 24 over 36. Okay, but we have to be able to simplify this. 24 is 3 times 8, which is 3 times 2 times 2 times 2. 36 is 4 times 9, or 2 times 2 times 3 times 3. And now we just want to simplify by getting rid of the ones that are the same, top and bottom. And you're left with 2/3. We want to do something similar here for the second one, except now that we're dividing. So we're going to keep that first fraction, change the sign in the middle to multiplication, and then flip the second fraction. And now if we multiply straight across, we get 4 times 16, which is 64. And 5 times 5 is 25. And there's no way to reduce this fraction, so it just stays 64 over 25. Finally, we have 8 over 11 divided by 24. Now 24 is a whole number, it's not a fraction, but you can write any whole number as a fraction by just writing it over 1. And so we can rewrite this as 8 over 11 divided by 24 over 1. Now that we have it written as a fraction, we can do the same thing we did in part B. Keep the first fraction, change the sign in the middle to multiplication, and then flip the second. 8 times 1 is 8. And 11 times 24 is 264. And we can reduce this just a little bit. 8 times 1, 11 times 24 is just 8 times 3. So 11 times 8 times 3. And we don't have to write this all the way out to prime factors because they both have an 8. And that simplifies to 1 over 33. So when we're adding and subtracting fractions, they have to have the same denominator. If the denominators are the same, simply add or subtract the numerator, the denominator will stay the same. If the denominators are not the same, you're going to have to write equivalent fractions with the same denominator. That denominator you're going to want to use is going to be the least common multiple, but since we're dealing with fractions, it's known as the least common denominator. And then we just want to add or subtract the numerators as it indicates. So here we have addition 2 over 11 plus 5 over 11. Both have the same denominator, so we keep the denominator and just add the numerator. 2 plus 5 is 7. Same thing here, 7, 6 minus 2, 6. We have the same denominator, so we just subtract. 7 minus 2 is 5 over 6. Remember, when you're adding or subtracting fractions, always keep the denominators the same. The only thing you're adding or subtracting is the numerator. So let's try this again, except now these fractions don't have the same denominator. We have 2/5 plus 1/4. We need to find the least common denominator, or the least common multiple, of 5 and 4. Well, 5 is just 5, it's prime. 4 is 2 times 2. And so to find the least common multiple, or the least common denominator, we have to write out all the factors as many times as they appear in each of the numbers, or the most times that they appear in each of the numbers. So our least common denominator, or our least common multiple, 5 times 2 times 2, which is just 20. And so now we want to rewrite each of these fractions as with a denominator of 20. So to do that, 2/5. To write that as something over 20, 5 times 4 is 20. And so if we multiply the bottom by 4, we've got to multiply the top by 4. And 2 times 4 is 8. We can now do a similar thing with 1/4. If we want to write 1/4 as something over 20, well, 5 times 4 is 20. If we multiply the bottom by 5, we've got to multiply the top by 5. That's 5 times 1 is just 5. Now that they have the same denominator, we can add the numerators and keep the denominator. And so the sum is just 13 over 20. We'll do a very similar thing here when we subtract. Our denominators are 6 and 12. Well, 6 is just 2 times 3. 12 is 2 times 2 times 3, or 2 times 6. And so our least common denominator is 2 times 2 times 3, or just 12. And so we don't have to do anything to the second fraction. We only have to do something to the first one. So we have 19 over 6, and we want to rewrite it as something over 12. Well, 6 times 2 is 12. And so we have to multiply the top by 2. And 19 times 2 is 38. And so what we have now is 38 over 12 minus 23 over 12, which is 15 over 12. And now we can reduce this. This is 3 times 5 over 2 times 3 times, 3 over 5 times over 2 times 2 times 3. The 3's cancel, and you're left with 5 over 4. So at the end of this lesson, you should be able to find the prime factorization of a number, find the least common multiple of a set of numbers, write equivalent fractions and simplify fractions, multiply and divide, and add and subtract fractions.